Sarah Mitchell never expected that her quiet evening jog through the park would become a life-or-death situation that would test every skill she had learned in 8 years as a Navy SEAL. What happened in those crucial 12 seconds would not only save her life but also demonstrate why training becomes instinct when survival is on the line. In a world where violence against women continues to rise and where predators believe they can overpower anyone they choose, Sarah's story stands as a powerful reminder that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes the person who looks like an easy target carries within them the heart of a warrior and the skills of a protector. This is not just another self-defense story. This is the true account of how years of military training, mental conditioning, and unwavering determination converged in a moment of pure terror to create something extraordinary. It's about the split-second decisions that define us, the courage that emerges when we're pushed to our limits, and the incredible power of preparation meeting opportunity. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about vulnerability, strength, and the human capacity to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's story will take you from her childhood dreams of serving her country through the grueling process of becoming one of the few women to earn the coveted SEAL Trident, to that fateful night when all her training would be put to the ultimate test. Prepare yourself for a journey that will leave you questioning your own limits and inspired by the incredible resilience of the human spirit. This is more than just a story of survival. It's a testament to what happens when preparation meets determination, and why you should never underestimate the quiet strength that walks among us every day. Sarah Mitchell's transformation from a small-town girl to one of the most elite warriors in the world began long before she ever set foot on a military base. Growing up in rural Montana, she was the daughter of a retired Marine and a high school teacher who instilled in her the values of discipline, courage, and service above self. Her father, James Mitchell, never pushed military service on his children, but he lived by a code that quietly influenced every aspect of Sarah's upbringing. At 12 years old, Sarah was already different from her peers. While other girls her age were interested in fashion magazines and boy bands, she could be found in the family garage, learning to change oil, fix engines, and understand the mechanics of things that most people took for granted. Her father taught her these skills not because he expected her to become a mechanic, but because he believed everyone should understand how to be self-sufficient. He would often tell her, "Sarah, the world doesn't owe you anything, but if you prepare yourself properly, you can handle whatever it throws at you." The first real test of Sarah's character came during her sophomore year of high school. The football team's star quarterback, Derek Patterson, had developed a reputation for being aggressive with girls who rejected his advances. When he cornered Sarah after a school dance and refused to accept her polite decline of his invitation, something inside her shifted. Instead of feeling intimidated or helpless, she felt a cold, calculating calm wash over her. She looked Derek directly in the eyes and spoke with a clarity that surprised even her. "You have exactly 3 seconds to step back, or you're going to learn why my father taught me to fight." Derek, who stood 6 feet 2 inches and weighed over 200 pounds, laughed at the 5'6" girl in front of him. His laughter stopped abruptly when Sarah's knee connected with his solar plexus, followed immediately by an elbow strike to his nose. As Derek doubled over in pain and shock, Sarah calmly walked away, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the realization that she had found something within herself that felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. The incident with Derek became a turning point in Sarah's life, though not in the way many people expected. Instead of getting into trouble or becoming the subject of gossip, she found herself earning the respect of her classmates and teachers. Word spread quickly about what had happened, but rather than painting Sarah as a violent troublemaker, the story that emerged was one of a young woman who had defended herself against someone who had refused to respect her boundaries. Her father's reaction was perhaps the most significant. When the principal called to inform him about the incident, James Mitchell listened quietly to the entire story before asking just one question: "Is Sarah in trouble for defending herself?" When the principal assured him that Sarah would not be punished, James simply said, "Good, she did exactly what she should have done." That evening, he sat with Sarah and explained something that would shape the rest of her life. Strength isn't about looking for fights or proving how tough you are. Real strength is about being prepared to protect yourself and others when there's no other choice. Today, you discovered that you have that kind of strength. The summer after her junior year, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. Instead of getting a typical summer job or spending her break relaxing, she approached her father with a request that would change everything. She wanted to attend a civilian version of military boot camp. The program was designed for young people who were considering military service, and it promised to provide a taste of what real military training involved. Her father was initially hesitant, not because he doubted Sarah's ability to handle the physical and mental challenges, but because he knew that once she experienced that level of training, there would be no going back. Military training doesn't just teach you skills. It changes the way you see yourself and the world around you. After several long conversations with both Sarah and her mother, he agreed to support her decision. The boot camp experience was everything Sarah had hoped it would be, and more challenging than she had imagined. For 6 weeks, she lived in military-style barracks with 30 other young people, following a strict schedule that began at 5 in the morning and ended well after dark. The physical training was demanding, but it was the mental conditioning that truly tested her limits. On the 3rd day of camp, during a particularly grueling obstacle course session, Sarah watched as several of her fellow campers quit mid-exercise, claiming the training was too hard or unrealistic. As she helped one of her teammates over a 10-foot wall while her own muscles screamed in protest, Sarah realized that the physical pain was temporary, but the mental strength she was building would last a lifetime. The instructors, all former military personnel, quickly identified Sarah as someone special. It wasn't just her physical capabilities, though. She consistently ranked in the top 5% of all physical fitness tests. It was her ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when others were panicking, and to put the success of her team ahead of her own comfort. By the end of the 2nd week, she had been chosen as a squad leader, responsible for motivating and organizing 12 other campers. One evening during what the instructors called Hell Week, Sarah faced a challenge that would become a defining moment in her journey toward becoming a SEAL. The exercise involved navigating a complex obstacle course in complete darkness while carrying a wounded teammate. The catch was that each team member would take turns being the wounded person, meaning everyone had to trust their teammates completely while being unable to see or help. When it was Sarah's turn to be carried, she found herself paired with Marcus, a young man who had struggled throughout the camp and was clearly at his breaking point. As he attempted to navigate the course while supporting her weight, Sarah could feel his fear and exhaustion threatening to overcome him. Instead of remaining passive, as the exercise required, she began speaking to him in a calm, steady voice, providing encouragement and guidance without taking control of the situation. "You've got this, Marcus," she whispered as he struggled to climb over a series of barriers while maintaining his grip on her. "Remember your breathing. Focus on one obstacle at a time. I trust you completely." Her words seemed to give Marcus the strength he needed, and together they completed the course faster than any other pair that night. After the exercise, the head instructor, a former Navy SEAL named Master Chief Rodriguez, pulled Sarah aside for a conversation that would plant the seed of her future career. "Mitchell," he said, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've seen thousands of young people come through this program. Most of them are here because they think military service will make them tough, or because they've watched too many action movies. You're different." He paused, studying her face in the dim light of the camp's common area. "You understand something that most people never figure out. Real strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about what you can inspire others to do for themselves and their team. That's the kind of leadership the military needs, especially in the special operations community." Master Chief Rodriguez went on to explain what it meant to be part of the special operations community, focusing particularly on the Navy SEALs. He described the selection process, the training pipeline, and the reality of serving in one of the most elite military units in the world. But he also explained something that many recruiters never mention: the psychological and emotional demands of carrying such responsibility. Being a SEAL isn't just about being able to shoot straight or hold your breath underwater for a long time, he said. It's about being someone that others can count on when everything goes wrong. It's about making split-second decisions that can mean the difference between life and death for your teammates. Most importantly, it's about carrying the weight of those decisions for the rest of your life, win or lose. That conversation stayed with Sarah long after boot camp ended, and she returned to her senior year of high school. She found herself researching everything she could about Navy SEAL training, reading books written by former SEALs, and watching documentaries about special operations missions. The more she learned, the more she realized that this was what she had been preparing for her entire life, even when she didn't know it. Her parents noticed the change in her immediately. Sarah had always been focused and determined, but now she had a clarity of purpose that was almost intimidating. She began training with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, running long distances in the Montana cold, swimming in frigid lakes, and practicing martial arts techniques she learned from online videos and library books. When college recruiters began visiting her school during her senior year, Sarah politely listened to their presentations about academic programs and campus life, but her mind was elsewhere. While her classmates debated between different universities based on social scenes and academic reputations, Sarah was quietly planning a path that would take her through Navy boot camp, naval special warfare training, and eventually to BUD/S, the infamous Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL training program. The decision to enlist in the Navy immediately after high school graduation was not popular with everyone in Sarah's life. Her mother, while supportive of her daughter's desire to serve, worried about the physical and emotional toll that military service would take on someone she still saw as her little girl. Several teachers and guidance counselors encouraged her to consider ROTC programs at prestigious universities, arguing that she could still serve as an officer while getting a college education first. But Sarah had made up her mind, and those who knew her best recognized that once she committed to something, there was no changing her course. Her father, perhaps understanding better than anyone what military service could offer his daughter, gave her his full support. "Sarah," he told her one evening as they sat on the family's front porch watching the sunset over the Montana mountains, "I've watched you grow into someone I'm incredibly proud of. You have gifts that most people never develop: courage, intelligence, and the ability to inspire others to be better than they thought they could be. The military will give you opportunities to use those gifts in ways that could make a real difference in the world." Graduation day arrived with all the typical fanfare of a small-town high school ceremony. But for Sarah, it felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of an adventure that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she could see her parents in the crowd, her father standing at attention in a way that only former Marines ever truly master, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. After the ceremony, as families gathered for pictures and celebrations, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. In just 6 weeks, she would report to Navy boot camp, beginning a journey that she knew would change her forever. As she hugged her parents and said goodbye to classmates who were heading off to traditional college experiences, Sarah realized that she was choosing a path that would be harder, more dangerous, and more demanding than anything most people her age would ever face. But as she looked around at the familiar faces and landscapes of her hometown, Sarah felt a deep sense of certainty about her choice. She was not running away from something. She was running toward something that felt like her destiny. The girl who had grown up fixing engines in her father's garage, who had defended herself against a bully without hesitation, and who had discovered her capacity for leadership in a summer boot camp, was ready to find out what she was truly capable of becoming. 3 days before leaving for Navy boot camp, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Master Chief Rodriguez, the former SEAL who had spoken to her about special operations during that life-changing summer camp, appeared at the family's front door with a small package in his hands. Sarah's father invited him in, and the three of them sat in the living room where Sarah had spent countless evenings dreaming about her future. "I wanted to give you this before you left," Rodriguez said, handing Sarah the package. Inside was a book, The Warrior Ethos by Stephen Pressfield, along with a handwritten note. "Sarah," the note read, "remember that becoming a warrior isn't about learning to fight. It's about learning to serve something greater than yourself. Stay focused on that purpose, and you'll find strength you never knew you had. Semper Fi, Master Chief Rodriguez." As Sarah held the book in her hands, she felt the weight of the journey ahead and the responsibility that came with choosing such a demanding path. She looked up at Rodriguez and her father, two men who had dedicated their lives to serving others, and made a promise that would guide every decision she made from that moment forward. "I won't let you down. I won't let any of you down." The next morning, Sarah began her final preparations for Navy boot camp, not knowing that the skills, mindset, and inner strength she was developing would one day save her life in ways she could never imagine. The girl from Montana who had learned to fight when necessary, to lead when called upon, and to serve something greater than herself was about to begin the transformation that would turn her into one of the most elite warriors in the world. The Greyhound bus that carried Sarah from Montana to Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois held 62 future sailors, but she felt completely alone as she watched the familiar landscapes of her childhood disappear behind her. The other recruits on the bus ranged from 18 to 25 years old, and most spent the journey either sleeping, listening to music, or nervously joking with each other about what awaited them at boot camp. Sarah used the time differently, reading Master Chief Rodriguez's book and mentally preparing herself for the challenges ahead. When the bus finally arrived at the naval station at 3 in the morning, the recruits were greeted by the sight of several drill instructors waiting in the darkness. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see that these men and women carried themselves with an authority and presence that commanded immediate respect. As the bus doors opened and the future sailors began to file out, the first thing they heard was a voice that cut through the night air like a blade. "Welcome to the United States Navy. Your civilian life ended the moment you stepped off that bus. For the next 8 weeks, you belong to me." The voice belonged to Petty Officer First Class Thompson, a career Navy man whose job was to transform a group of teenagers and young adults into disciplined sailors ready to serve their country. As the recruits lined up in what they hoped resembled military formation, Thompson walked slowly down the line, studying each face with an intensity that made even the most confident among them question their decision to enlist. When he reached Sarah, Thompson paused for a moment longer than he had with the others. She stood perfectly straight, her eyes focused directly ahead, her hands positioned exactly as she had learned during her summer boot camp experience. After what felt like an eternity, Thompson moved on without saying a word, but Sarah had the distinct impression that she had passed some kind of initial test. The first week of Navy boot camp was designed to break down everything the recruits thought they knew about themselves and begin building them back up as members of something larger than any individual. Sarah watched as several of her fellow recruits struggled with the physical demands, the constant scrutiny from drill instructors, and the complete loss of personal freedom that defined military life. During a particularly challenging physical training session on the 4th day, Sarah found herself paired with Jennifer Reyes, a young woman from California who had enlisted to escape a troubled family situation. Jennifer was struggling with the running requirements and was clearly on the verge of quitting. As they ran together around the base track, Jennifer gasped that she couldn't continue and began to slow down. Without thinking, Sarah matched Jennifer's pace and began talking to her in the same calm, encouraging voice she had used with Marcus during summer camp. "Stay with me, Jennifer. We're going to finish this together. Focus on my voice and let your body do what it knows how to do." For the next mile and a half, Sarah provided a steady stream of encouragement and guidance, helping Jennifer maintain a pace that would meet the minimum requirements for passing the fitness test. When they crossed the finish line, Jennifer was exhausted but triumphant. As they walked through their cool-down routine, she turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes and said, "I would have quit without you. I was ready to give up on everything." That moment taught Sarah something important about leadership that no textbook could have conveyed. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones you help others achieve. The drill instructors noticed Sarah's natural ability to motivate and guide her fellow recruits, but they also began testing her in ways that were specifically designed to challenge potential leaders. During inspections, they would deliberately find minor flaws in her bunk or uniform, then watch to see how she responded to criticism and correction. During group exercises, they would place her in positions where she had to make quick decisions that affected the entire unit. 3 weeks into boot camp, Sarah faced her first major leadership test during a simulated emergency exercise. The scenario involved a shipboard fire that required coordinated response from multiple teams working in dangerous conditions. Sarah had been chosen as the leader of the damage control team, responsible for fighting the fire while ensuring the safety of everyone involved. As the exercise began, everything that could go wrong seemed to happen at once. The primary water line failed, forcing her team to find alternative methods of fighting the fire. 2 of her team members became casualties and had to be evacuated. The smoke was so thick that visibility dropped to nearly zero, and the heat made it difficult to think clearly. While other teams struggled with communication and coordination, Sarah's team moved with precision and purpose. She had quickly assessed the situation, assigned specific roles to each team member based on their strengths, and established clear communication protocols that allowed them to work effectively despite the chaos around them. When the exercise ended, her team had successfully contained the fire and evacuated all casualties faster than any group in the history of the training program. After the exercise, Petty Officer Thompson called Sarah aside for a conversation that would set the tone for the rest of her naval career. "Mitchell," he said, "I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've trained over 3,000 sailors. Most of them are good people who work hard and follow orders. Some of them have the potential to become excellent petty officers or even officers. But every once in a while, I see someone who has the qualities needed for something special." He paused, studying her face with the same intensity he had shown on that first night. "You don't just follow orders, Mitchell. You understand the purpose behind the orders and you find ways to accomplish the mission even when the original plan falls apart. More importantly, you make everyone around you better at their jobs. That's not something we can teach. That's something you either have or you don't." Thompson went on to explain that there were opportunities within the Navy for sailors who demonstrated exceptional leadership potential and the ability to handle extreme stress. And he mentioned several programs, including Naval Special Warfare, that recruited only the most elite personnel. "I'm not saying you should apply for these programs," he told her. "But I am saying that if you did apply, you would have my strongest recommendation." That evening, as Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about her conversation with Thompson, she realized that her childhood dreams of serving her country were evolving into something much more specific and demanding. She had always known that she wanted to make a difference, but now she was beginning to understand that the biggest difference might come from pushing herself to the absolute limits of her capabilities. The remaining weeks of boot camp flew by in a blur of training exercises, classroom instruction, and increasingly challenging leadership responsibilities. Sarah had been promoted to recruit petty officer, making her responsible for the discipline and performance of her entire division. It was a role that required her to balance the competing demands of supporting her fellow recruits while maintaining the standards that the drill instructors expected. One evening, 2 weeks before graduation, Sarah faced a situation that tested every aspect of her character and judgment. She discovered that one of her fellow recruits, a young man named David Parker, had been stealing small items from other recruits' lockers. The thefts were minor candy, personal hygiene items, nothing valuable, but they were creating tension and distrust within the division. Sarah knew that she had several options. She could report Parker to the drill instructors, which would likely result in his immediate dismissal from the Navy. She could confront him privately and try to resolve the situation without involving the chain of command. Or she could ignore the situation and hope it resolved itself. Each choice carried significant risks and potential consequences. After careful consideration, Sarah chose a fourth option that demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that would later make her invaluable as a SEAL. She arranged a private meeting with Parker and presented him with an ultimatum. He would voluntarily confess to the thefts, make restitution to everyone he had stolen from, and commit to a personal improvement plan that Sarah would oversee, or she would report him to the drill instructors the next morning. Parker, who was clearly struggling with personal issues that went far beyond boot camp, broke down and admitted that he had been stealing because he felt inadequate compared to the other recruits and was trying to find ways to feel in control of his situation. Sarah spent the next 3 hours helping him understand that everyone in boot camp was struggling with similar feelings of inadequacy and uncertainty, and that his response to those feelings was what would determine his success or failure. Over the following 2 weeks, Sarah worked with Parker every evening, helping him develop better coping strategies and building his confidence through additional training and mentoring. By graduation day, Parker had not only stopped stealing, but had become one of the most improved recruits in the division. Years later, he would write to Sarah from his deployment aboard a Navy destroyer, thanking her for seeing something in him that he hadn't been able to see in himself. The boot camp graduation ceremony was everything Sarah had imagined it would be, and more emotional than she had expected. As she stood with her fellow sailors wearing the dress blue uniform that she had earned through 8 weeks of the most challenging training she had ever experienced, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment and belonging. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell from Montana. She was Seaman Mitchell, United States Navy, ready to serve her country wherever that service might take her. Her parents had flown in for the graduation ceremony, and seeing the pride in their eyes as she crossed the stage made every difficult moment of boot camp worth it. But even as she celebrated this significant milestone, Sarah knew that boot camp was just the beginning. She had already submitted her application for Naval Special Warfare training, and if accepted, she would face challenges that would make boot camp seem like a pleasant introduction to military life. 3 days after graduation, while most of her fellow boot camp graduates were heading to their first duty assignments, Sarah reported to Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, to begin the most demanding phase of her military training. The selection process for Navy SEAL training was legendary for its difficulty, and fewer than 20% of applicants successfully completed the entire program. As Sarah walked through the gates of the Naval Special Warfare Center for the first time, she carried with her everything she had learned from her father about self-reliance, from her summer boot camp experience about leadership under pressure, and from her time in boot camp about the power of serving something greater than herself. She also carried the knowledge that she was about to be tested in ways that would push her far beyond what she thought was possible. The training facility itself was intimidating in its simplicity. There were no impressive buildings or high-tech equipment visible from the entrance, just a collection of functional structures surrounded by training areas that looked designed to break people both physically and mentally. As Sarah checked in with the administrative staff and received her initial briefings, she noticed something important about the atmosphere of the place. Everyone, from the instructors to the support staff, carried themselves with a quiet confidence that spoke of having been tested and proven under the most extreme conditions. Her first week at the Naval Special Warfare Center was spent in administrative processing, medical examinations, and initial fitness assessments. Sarah discovered that she was one of only 3 women in her class of 62 potential SEAL candidates, and the only one who had come directly from boot camp rather than from other Navy assignments. The other candidates ranged in age from 19 to 32, and many of them had already served several years in other Navy roles before applying for SEAL training. During the initial fitness assessments, Sarah found herself performing in the top 10% of all candidates, despite being smaller than most of her male counterparts. Her years of training in Montana, combined with the conditioning she had received in boot camp, had prepared her body for the physical demands of special operations training. But she also quickly realized that physical fitness was just the entry fee for SEAL training. The real challenges would be mental and emotional. On Friday of her first week, all the candidates were assembled for a briefing that would set the tone for everything that followed. The speaker was Captain Michael Harrison, a career SEAL officer with over 20 years of special operations experience. As he stood before the group of hopeful candidates, his presence commanded the same kind of respect that Sarah had noticed in Master Chief Rodriguez and Petty Officer Thompson, but amplified to an almost intimidating degree. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harrison began, "you are here because you believe you have what it takes to become Navy SEALs. Over the next several months, we are going to test that belief in ways that will challenge everything you think you know about your own limitations. Some of you will discover that you are capable of far more than you ever imagined. Others will discover that wanting something is not the same as being able to achieve it." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Being a Navy SEAL is not about being the strongest person in the room or the fastest swimmer in the pool. It's about being someone that others can count on when failure means people die. It's about making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. Most importantly, it's about carrying the responsibility of being part of something that has protected American interests around the world for over 50 years. As Captain Harrison spoke, Sarah felt the same sense of clarity and purpose that had guided her decision to enlist in the Navy. She looked around at her fellow candidates and realized that each of them had made the same choice she had, to attempt something that most people would never even consider trying. Whether they succeeded or failed, they had all chosen to test themselves against one of the most demanding standards in the military. The briefing concluded with Captain Harrison making a statement that would prove prophetic for Sarah's journey. "The person you are when you walked into this room today is not the person you will be when you leave this program. Whether you graduate as a Navy SEAL or you move on to serve the Navy in other ways, you will be fundamentally changed by what you experience here. My advice is to embrace that change and trust in your ability to become more than you ever thought possible. That evening, as Sarah prepared for the beginning of her SEAL training, she called her parents to let them know she had arrived safely and to share her first impressions of the program. Her father, who had researched SEAL training extensively after Sarah announced her intentions, asked her a simple question that would guide her through every challenge she was about to face. "Sarah, are you ready to find out what you're really made of?" As she hung up the phone and prepared for what she knew would be the most demanding months of her life, Sarah realized that she was ready, more than ready. She was eager to discover the limits of her own capabilities and to earn the right to serve alongside the most elite warriors in the world. The first phase of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training began at 4 in the morning, with the sound of instructors banging on metal trash cans and shouting commands that would have seemed cruel to civilian ears, but were simply the beginning of a process designed to identify those who possessed the mental toughness required for special operations. Sarah rolled out of her bunk with the same mechanical precision she had learned in boot camp, but she quickly discovered that SEAL training operated according to standards that made boot camp look gentle by comparison. Within the first week, 12 of the original 62 candidates had dropped out of the program, ringing the brass bell that stood in the center of the training compound 3 times to signal their decision to quit. Sarah watched each of these departures with a mixture of understanding and determination, knowing that every person who chose to leave had made a rational decision based on their assessment of their own limits, but also knowing that she had not yet discovered her own. The physical training in SEAL preparation was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. 4-mile runs in soft sand while carrying heavy equipment, swimming distances that would challenge Olympic athletes, and obstacle courses that seemed designed by people who had studied every possible way to test human endurance and coordination. But Sarah quickly learned that the physical challenges, demanding as they were, served a purpose beyond simple fitness testing. During a particularly brutal training session in the 3rd week, Sarah found herself struggling to complete a series of underwater exercises that required her to swim the length of an Olympic-sized pool while holding her breath and performing complex tasks with diving equipment. As she pushed off from the pool wall for her 5th attempt at the exercise, her lungs burning and her vision beginning to blur from oxygen deprivation, Sarah experienced something that would become crucial to her survival years later. She learned to function effectively while her body was convinced it was dying. The exercise required her to swim underwater to a simulated submarine, remove and replace several pieces of equipment, and return to the starting point, all while holding her breath and maintaining perfect buoyancy control. On her previous 4 attempts, Sarah had been forced to surface before completing the task, each failure adding to the psychological pressure of knowing that continued failure might result in her removal from the program. As she reached the midpoint of the pool on her 5th attempt, Sarah felt her body beginning to panic from lack of oxygen. Her heart rate spiked, her muscles began to cramp, and every instinct told her to surface immediately and breathe. Instead, she forced herself to slow down, to think clearly despite her body's distress signals, and to focus exclusively on the task at hand. She completed the equipment replacement with mechanical precision, then began the swim back to the starting wall. By the time she reached the wall and surfaced, Sarah was closer to losing consciousness than she had ever been in her life. But she had completed the exercise successfully and, more importantly, she had learned something about her own capacity to override her body's survival instincts when necessary. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who had been monitoring the exercise, simply nodded at her and made a note on his clipboard. But Sarah knew she had passed an important test. The psychological challenges of SEAL training were subtler, but equally demanding. The instructors used a variety of techniques designed to test each candidate's mental toughness, emotional stability, and ability to function under extreme stress. One of these techniques involved what they called stress inoculation, exercises designed to simulate the chaos and uncertainty of combat situations. During one such exercise in the 4th week, Sarah and her boat crew were awakened at 2 in the morning and told they had 20 minutes to prepare for a mission that would require them to navigate to a target location using only a compass and dead reckoning, complete a series of tasks under simulated combat conditions, and return to base before sunrise. The catch was that they would be doing all of this while instructors used various techniques to disorient and distract them. As Sarah's team made their way through the darkness toward their objective, they were subjected to loud noises, flashing lights, and instructors shouting conflicting commands designed to create confusion and panic. Several members of her team began to lose focus, and Sarah realized that her role as boat crew leader required her to maintain not only her own composure, but also the cohesion of her entire team. Using the same calm, steady voice that had helped her through previous challenges, Sarah began providing clear, simple instructions to her team members, filtering out the distracting commands from the instructors and focusing everyone's attention on the specific tasks they needed to complete. When one of her teammates became disoriented and began to panic, Sarah physically positioned herself between him and the source of the distraction, creating a calm space where he could regain his composure. The mission was completed successfully, and when they returned to base, Instructor Martinez pulled Sarah aside for one of the informal counseling sessions that were part of the continuous evaluation process. "Mitchell," he said, "most candidates think SEAL training is about proving how tough they are individually. You seem to understand that it's really about proving how effective you can be as part of a team, even when everything around you is falling apart." This insight proved crucial as Sarah approached the most infamous part of SEAL training, Hell Week. The 5-day ordeal was legendary throughout the military for its combination of sleep deprivation, constant physical activity, and psychological pressure that pushed candidates far beyond what they believed were their limits. Over half of the remaining candidates were expected to quit during Hell Week, and those who survived would have demonstrated the kind of mental toughness that special operations required. Hell Week began on a Sunday evening with what the instructors called Breakout, a surprise event designed to shock candidates out of any sense of routine or comfort they might have developed. Sarah was lying in her bunk, writing a letter to her parents, when the building suddenly filled with the sound of machine gun fire simulations, explosions, and instructors shouting through bullhorns. Within minutes, she and her fellow candidates found themselves standing in formation outside the barracks, soaking wet from fire hoses and covered in sand. For the next 5 days, Sarah would get fewer than 4 hours of total sleep while participating in continuous training exercises that included long-distance runs, ocean swims in frigid water, boat races, obstacle course repetitions, and combat simulations. The sleep deprivation was perhaps the most challenging aspect, as it affected not only physical performance, but also mental clarity and emotional stability. By Tuesday evening, 38 hours into Hell Week, Sarah was experiencing hallucinations from sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion. During a particularly demanding boat race, she began seeing her childhood dog running along the beach beside her team's boat. The hallucination was so vivid that she nearly called out to the dog before realizing what was happening. Instead of being alarmed by this breakdown of her normal mental processes, Sarah found herself strangely calm, recognizing that her mind was simply finding ways to cope with extreme stress. The boat races were especially brutal, requiring 6-person teams to carry 200-pound inflatable boats over their heads while running through soft sand, then paddle the boats through heavy surf for distances that seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah's boat crew had developed into a tight unit that worked with the kind of coordination that only comes from shared suffering and mutual dependence. On Wednesday night, during what felt like the 100th repetition of boat races, Sarah's team was struggling more than usual. 2 of her teammates were showing signs of hypothermia from the cold Pacific water, and everyone was operating on reserves they didn't know they possessed. As they carried their boat back up the beach for another race, Sarah noticed that one of her teammates, Petty Officer Davis, was stumbling and seemed to be losing consciousness while still trying to maintain his grip on the boat. Without thinking, Sarah shifted her position to support more of the boat's weight, allowing Davis to maintain his position without carrying his full share of the load. She also began talking to the entire team, providing encouragement and focusing their attention on small, achievable goals rather than the seemingly endless nature of the exercise. "Just get to that piece of driftwood," she would say, pointing to a landmark 50 yards ahead. "Don't think about anything else. Just get to the driftwood." This technique, which Sarah had developed instinctively, proved effective in helping her team maintain performance when their bodies wanted to quit. By breaking down seemingly impossible tasks into smaller, manageable objectives, she was able to keep everyone focused on what they could control, rather than becoming overwhelmed by what seemed uncontrollable. Thursday morning brought one of the most challenging exercises of Hell Week, surf passage, which required teams to paddle their boats through dangerous surf conditions to reach points far offshore, then return safely to the beach. The Pacific Ocean was particularly rough that day, with waves reaching 8 to 10 feet, and water temperatures cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. As Sarah's team paddled their boat through the surf zone, they were repeatedly flipped by waves that seemed impossible to navigate. Each time they capsized, they had to right the boat, climb back in, and continue the exercise, all while fighting the ocean's attempts to separate them from their equipment and each other. During one particularly violent capsize, Sarah found herself separated from her team and being pulled away from shore by a strong current. For a moment, as she treaded water in the frigid ocean while watching her teammates struggle to right their boat without her, Sarah felt the kind of despair that had driven so many other candidates to quit the program. The cold was numbing her limbs, the salt water had made her violently nauseous, and she had been awake for over 70 hours. It would have been easy to signal for rescue and end the exercise. Instead, Sarah forced herself to think tactically about her situation. She assessed the current, identified the most efficient swimming technique for the conditions, and began making her way back to her team with the same methodical determination she had learned to apply to every other challenge. When she reached the boat, she didn't waste energy complaining about the conditions or expressing frustration about the exercise. She simply took her position and helped her team continue the mission. Friday evening, as Hell Week entered its final hours, Sarah found herself in a state that was simultaneously exhausted and alert, pushed beyond normal human limits but somehow still functioning effectively. The final exercise was a 14-mile run carrying full equipment, followed by a series of combat simulations that would test everything they had learned about working together under extreme stress. As her depleted team made their way through the final miles of the run, Sarah realized that she had discovered something about herself that she could never have learned under normal circumstances. She was capable of functioning effectively even when her body was convinced it couldn't continue, of making good decisions when her mind was clouded by exhaustion, and of helping others perform at their best when everyone was operating at the absolute limits of their endurance. When Hell Week officially ended on Friday evening, only 18 of the original 62 candidates remained in the program. Sarah stood with her surviving classmates as Instructor Martinez congratulated them on completing one of the most demanding tests in the military, but she barely heard his words. She was focused on the profound sense of transformation she felt, knowing that she was fundamentally different from the person who had started the week. That evening, as she finally got her first full night's sleep in nearly 6 days, Sarah dreamed not about the challenges she had just completed, but about the challenges that still lay ahead. Hell Week was just one milestone in a training program that would continue for several more months, and she knew that each phase would bring new tests of her capabilities and character. The weeks following Hell Week brought different but equally demanding challenges. The second phase of SEAL training focused on combat diving and underwater operations, skills that would be crucial for maritime special operations missions. Sarah found that her experience during Hell Week had given her a new level of confidence in her ability to handle extreme stress, and she approached each new challenge with the knowledge that she could push through barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. During advanced diving training, Sarah learned to use sophisticated underwater breathing apparatus, navigate in zero-visibility conditions, and conduct complex military operations while submerged. The training pushed her understanding of physics, physiology, and psychology as she learned to function in an environment that was inherently hostile to human life. One particularly challenging exercise required her to navigate an underwater obstacle course while wearing blacked-out diving goggles, relying entirely on her sense of touch and her ability to maintain orientation in three-dimensional space. The course included tight spaces that triggered claustrophobic responses, sharp objects that required careful navigation to avoid injury, and time limits that added psychological pressure to the physical challenges. As Sarah made her way through the course, feeling her way along guide ropes and using her hands to identify obstacles and pathways, she drew on the mental techniques she had developed during Hell Week, Instead of becoming overwhelmed by the darkness and the complexity of the course, she focused on one small section at a time, trusting her training and her instincts to guide her through each challenge. The third phase of SEAL training focused on land warfare, teaching candidates the skills they would need for direct action missions, reconnaissance operations, and other special operations tasks that might require them to operate far from any support. This phase included advanced marksmanship, explosive ordnance training, small unit tactics, and survival skills that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Sarah discovered that she had a natural aptitude for marksmanship, consistently scoring in the top 5% of her class with both rifle and pistol. But more importantly, she learned to shoot accurately while under physical and psychological stress, maintaining precision even when her body was exhausted or when she was operating under simulated combat conditions that included loud noises, bright flashes, and instructors shouting commands designed to break her concentration. The explosive ordnance training was particularly demanding, requiring candidates to learn not only how to use various types of explosives safely and effectively, but also how to think strategically about their application in different tactical situations. Sarah learned to calculate blast effects, plan demolition operations, and handle unstable explosives under time pressure, all while maintaining the kind of attention to detail that could mean the difference between mission success and disaster. As her SEAL training neared completion, Sarah had been transformed from the motivated young woman who had arrived at Coronado months earlier into someone who possessed skills and capabilities that few people in the world would ever develop. She had learned to function effectively in environments ranging from Arctic waters to desert conditions, to use weapons and equipment that most people would never see, and to make tactical decisions under pressure that could affect the lives of her teammates and the success of military operations. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had learned to trust herself completely. She had discovered that her limits were far beyond what she had ever imagined, that she could overcome obstacles that seemed impossible, and that she could be counted on by others when failure was not an option. These lessons would prove crucial years later when she found herself in a situation where her survival depended entirely on her ability to act decisively and effectively when every second counted. 3 years after completing her first combat deployment, Sarah found herself in a phase of her naval career that felt almost surreal compared to the intensity of special operations missions. She had been assigned to a training position at the Naval Special Warfare Center, where she worked with new SEAL candidates who reminded her of herself during those early days when she was discovering the extent of her own capabilities. The assignment was considered both an honor and a necessary step in her professional development, allowing her to share her operational experience while preparing for eventual promotion to senior leadership positions. Life in Coronado had settled into a routine that Sarah found both satisfying and somewhat restless. Her days were filled with the structured demands of training new SEALs, her evenings often spent in physical fitness activities that helped her maintain the conditioning standards required for potential recall to operational duty. She had purchased a small apartment near the base, furnished it with the minimal belongings that reflected her military lifestyle, and developed friendships with other military personnel who understood the unique challenges of transitioning between high-intensity deployments and the relative calm of stateside assignments. On the evening that would change everything, Sarah had decided to go for her regular 5-mile run through Balboa Park, a route that took her through some of San Diego's most beautiful urban landscapes, while providing the kind of challenging terrain that kept her training interesting. She preferred running in the early evening when the temperature was beginning to cool and the park was less crowded with tourists and casual visitors. The run began like hundreds of others she had completed over the past year, with Sarah settling into the steady rhythm that allowed her to cover long distances while maintaining the kind of situational awareness that had become automatic during her military training. She wore lightweight running clothes, carried only her identification and a small amount of cash, and followed a route that she knew well enough to navigate while allowing her mind to process the events of her day. As she ran through a section of the park that was bordered by dense vegetation and had limited visibility to nearby roads, Sarah noticed 2 men who seemed to be following the same path she was using, but maintaining a consistent distance behind her. Her initial assessment was that they were probably other runners who happened to be using the same route, but something about their movement patterns triggered the kind of subtle alarm that her military training had taught her to trust. Instead of dismissing her concerns, Sarah began implementing the kind of threat assessment procedures that had become second nature during her years in special operations. She varied her pace slightly to see if the men behind her would adjust their speed accordingly. She took a route variation that would test whether they were simply following the main park path or were specifically tracking her movements. Most importantly, she began identifying potential defensive positions and escape routes, in case her growing suspicions proved justified. The men behind her matched each of her course variations, maintained their distance when she slowed down, and appeared to be coordinating their movements in a way that suggested they were working together rather than simply running in the same area. Sarah's threat assessment shifted from casual awareness to active concern as she realized that she was likely being stalked by people who meant her harm. As she approached a section of the park that was particularly isolated, with heavy vegetation on both sides of the path and limited visibility from surrounding areas, Sarah made the tactical decision to reverse course and head back toward more populated sections of the park. This maneuver would force the men behind her to reveal their intentions, since legitimate runners would have no reason to also reverse course at the same time. When Sarah turned around and began running back in the direction she had come from, the two men immediately stopped their forward movement and attempted to position themselves to block her path. This action confirmed her assessment that she was dealing with a deliberate threat rather than a coincidental encounter with other park users. The men appeared to be in their late 20s or early 30s, both physically fit and moving with the kind of coordination that suggested they had planned their approach carefully. Sarah's training allowed her to assess their capabilities and intentions rapidly. They were positioning themselves to trap her in the isolated section of the park. Their body language suggested aggressive intent, and their coordination indicated that this was not their first time working together in this type of situation. As the distance between Sarah and the two men decreased, she found herself in a situation that combined elements of every training scenario she had experienced during her years as a SEAL. She was outnumbered, operating without backup, facing opponents whose capabilities were unknown, and operating in terrain that offered both advantages and disadvantages depending on how the encounter developed. The larger of the two men, who appeared to be the leader, stepped directly into Sarah's path and began speaking in a tone that was clearly intended to be intimidating. "Hold on there, sweetheart. We just want to have a friendly conversation with you. No need to be in such a hurry." His companion moved to Sarah's left flank, positioning himself to prevent her from escaping in that direction while maintaining enough distance to avoid being engaged by both men simultaneously if the situation escalated to physical violence. Sarah's response drew on every aspect of her military training, but especially the lessons she had learned about de-escalation and threat assessment under pressure. She stopped running, but maintained a balanced stance that would allow her to move quickly in any direction. She kept her hands visible but positioned where she could defend herself if necessary. Most importantly, she projected the kind of calm confidence that might convince potential attackers to reconsider their planned course of action. "I'm not interested in conversation," Sarah said in a clear, steady voice that carried no trace of fear or uncertainty. "I'm going to continue my run now. I suggest you gentlemen continue yours in a different direction." Her tone was respectful but firm, giving the men an opportunity to withdraw without losing face while making it clear that she was not going to be intimidated into compliance. The men's response confirmed Sarah's assessment that she was dealing with predators rather than people who might be willing to resolve the situation peacefully. The leader laughed and took a step closer, moving into what Sarah recognized as an attack position. "I don't think you understand the situation, sweetheart. You're going to come with us for a little while, and whether you have a good time or a bad time depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be." Sarah's mind shifted into the tactical mode that had been developed through years of combat training and operational experience. She assessed her environment, noting that the vegetation on both sides of the path would limit the men's ability to coordinate their attack, but would also restrict her own movement options. She calculated distances and angles, identifying the most effective defensive positions and potential weapons that might be available in the immediate area. Most importantly, Sarah made the mental transition from civilian to warrior, accessing the mindset and capabilities that had carried her through Hell Week, combat missions, and every other challenge she had faced during her military career. The woman who had learned to function effectively when her body was convinced it was dying, who had made tactical decisions under enemy fire, and who had proven herself capable of handling whatever challenges the world could present, was now facing a situation where all of that training and experience would be put to the ultimate test. The men made their moves simultaneously, with the leader lunging toward Sarah while his companion attempted to flank her from the left. Their coordination was good, but it was the coordination of people who had overpowered victims through surprise and intimidation, rather than the tactical precision of people who had faced trained opposition. Sarah's response was everything the men had not expected and could not have prepared for. Instead of attempting to flee or freezing in panic as their previous victims had probably done, she moved toward the attack with the kind of controlled aggression that transformed her from victim to threat in less than a second. Her first movement was a lateral step that took her off the line of the leader's attack, while positioning her to engage him before his companion could reach her. As the leader stumbled past her intended position, Sarah's elbow connected with the base of his skull, with precisely the force and angle needed to disrupt his nervous system without causing permanent injury. The leader dropped to the ground, temporarily incapacitated, but not permanently damaged, while Sarah smoothly transitioned to engage his companion, who had committed to his flanking movement and was now in a position where his momentum carried him directly into Sarah's defensive zone. Her second technique was a knee strike to the companion's solar plexus, followed immediately by a controlled takedown that placed him on the ground next to his partner. Both men were conscious but incapacitated, unable to continue their attack but not seriously injured. The entire encounter had lasted less than 12 seconds, during which Sarah had neutralized two attackers who had expected to overpower a solitary female runner through physical intimidation and superior numbers. As she stood over the two men, who were struggling to regain their breath and their composure, Sarah felt the same calm certainty that had guided her through every other challenge she had faced during her military career. "Gentlemen," she said in the same calm, steady voice she had used throughout the encounter, "you picked the wrong person to threaten tonight. I'm going to leave now, and I suggest you use this opportunity to reconsider your life choices. If I ever see either of you in this park again, or if I hear about you threatening other runners, you'll discover that tonight was me being gentle." As Sarah walked away from the scene, she reflected on how her years of military training had prepared her not just for combat situations, but for any scenario where preparation, mental toughness, and tactical thinking could make the difference between success and failure. The skills she had developed through Hell Week, combat deployments, and hundreds of training exercises had been tested in a context she had never anticipated, but they had proven as effective in protecting herself from civilian predators as they had been in completing military missions against enemy forces. The incident was reported to park security and local police, leading to the arrest of both men, who were found to have been responsible for several previous attacks against women in the area. Sarah's statement to the investigating officers was brief and factual, focusing on the events without elaborating on the military background that had made her response possible. In the days following the encounter, Sarah found herself reflecting on how the warrior mindset she had developed during her military career had become an integral part of who she was, extending far beyond her professional duties to influence every aspect of how she approached challenges and threats. The confidence, situational awareness, and tactical thinking that had been forged through years of demanding training had become tools that she could apply to any situation where those capabilities might be needed. More importantly, Sarah realized that her story represented something larger than a single successful self-defense encounter. It demonstrated how proper training, mental preparation, and the willingness to face challenges head-on could transform anyone from a potential victim into someone capable of protecting themselves and others when protection was needed. The young woman from Montana who had dreamed of serving her country, who had survived SEAL training, and who had completed combat missions in hostile environments, had proven that the warrior spirit she had developed could be applied to any situation where courage, preparation, and determination were required. Her story became a reminder that strength comes in many forms, that preparation creates opportunities, and that the capacity to overcome seemingly impossible odds exists within anyone willing to develop it through dedication and training. Sarah returned to her duties, training the next generation of Navy SEALs with a renewed understanding of why the skills and mindset they were developing were important not just for military operations, but for any situation where someone needed the capacity to protect themselves or others when there were no other options available. Her experience had confirmed what her father had taught her years earlier. The world doesn't owe anyone anything, but proper preparation makes it possible to handle whatever challenges life might present. The story of how a Navy SEAL disarmed her attackers in 12 seconds became more than just an account of successful self-defense. It became a testament to the power of training, preparation, and the warrior mindset to transform ordinary people into extraordinary protectors, capable of rising to meet any challenge when the situation demands it.